Hi, this is Anita from the Dusty Roads podcast, or from the blog, A Bus on a Dusty Road. We are all about living life as a global citizen. And as part of living life as a global citizen, today I want to talk about something that is on my mind, or something that I've seen a lot by living over here in Asia. And I want to talk about the difference between poverty and living poor. Poverty is defined by the World Vision as lacking enough resources to provide for the necessities of life. And the necessities of life that they list down are food, clean water, shelter, and clothing. So poverty is defined by somebody who cannot provide for these life necessities that they have defined: food, clean water, shelter, and clothing. And this is where it can kind of get a little bit tricky, because poverty is not the same as living poor. In other words, even though you're visiting, let's say, a developing country or a country that is extremely poor, but you may find that the people there have clothing. Maybe they make the clothing themselves. They may have housing. They may be living in a bamboo hut. They may or may not have access to clean water, or they may have to boil their water, and they may grow their own food. Under this requirement here, they may not be exactly known to have poverty. They could instead be living poor. This is where, when you spend some time up in some of these areas, like I have in some of the ethnic minority areas, and you will find that there's many people in these hill tribe communities that don't have access to a lot, but they do have access to these things. They do have housing. They do have relatively clean water. They can boil their water. They're able to make their own clothes, and they're able to grow their own food. Yes, they may not eat meat very often. They mainly rice and vegetables, but technically speaking, they would not be considered as living in poverty under this definition of poverty. On the other hand, there could be somebody who's living in a city like San Francisco, where San Francisco now has a huge homeless problem because of the fact that it's so expensive for people to live in San Francisco. The same person could be working two jobs, could not have a place to live, so they may be living in a homeless shelter. They would be considered living in poverty under this definition because they do not have a home or a real place to live, or they may be living out on the streets. A Bus on a Dusty Road, we're all about living life as a global citizen. So you might ask yourself, well, why should I care? Why should this definition matter? Why should it matter between poverty and living poor? We believe that if we all live as global citizens, that no matter where we live, whether it's in the United States, Canada, Australia, Europe, Africa, Asia, or even Polynesia, what matters is that we should all be looking at ways to live life as a global citizen. And part of this should be understand issues that affect people in these parts of the world. One of the things that struck me about this definition of poverty is there's nothing that says anything about the fact that a person who is living in poverty can't afford a phone, can't get on the internet, and isn't able to have access to education. Not having an iPhone, a laptop, or a computer is not the definition of poverty. I remember years ago, I was in Beijing with a girl from Sweden that I had with me and one of my managers from China. And we were sitting outside the old part of Beijing. We're sitting watching people go by, and we were sitting at this restaurant, and somebody came by that was, extremely poor. They looked like they were maybe homeless or picking up garbage off the street. And I said to her, well, this is poverty. This is what poverty looks like. Because I knew that she was raised in Sweden, a country that relatively didn't see poverty and really didn't know poverty. And she said, I understand poverty. It's like when I wanted to buy a sofa for my bedroom, but I couldn't afford it. And I said, no, that is not poverty. You already have a roof over your head, you have a house, you have food. You're not concerned about those things. That is not poverty. Poverty is that person over there who probably doesn't have enough to eat this evening. Poverty is someone who doesn't have a roof over their head. Poverty is someone who doesn't have access to clean water. Poverty is someone who doesn't have access to a toilet. Poverty has nothing to do with a person's ability to be able to, have a sofa in their bedroom, or to be able to, have the latest iPhone or only have an old iPhone, or maybe don't even have an iPhone. Maybe they just have one of those old flip phones and that's all they can afford. That is not the definition of poverty. Yes, being on the internet and being able to connect to the great worldwide, it's important. It's good. It can help people that are living in poverty. It can help them to gain an education, to be able to learn things and to get out of their education. There are many parts of the world too where people have access to electricity, yet they have food, they have shelter, water, and clothing. So even having electricity is not down on the definition of somebody who is living in poverty versus someone who is living poor. It is very interesting to think about these things and to reflect upon these things and to ask ourselves, what does poverty really mean? Is poverty the same as living poor? Now, I'm going to diverge a little bit off the subject and talk about something else that I've maybe talked about a bit before. I have lived in Asia for a long time, and as such, I have seen a lot of poverty on the streets here. I have also come across a lot of beggars or people that are out begging on the streets. And my feeling on that has been, especially if the people are begging in an area where there's a lot of foreigners or tourists are going by, a lot of those people really are not living in poverty, and many of them are not even living poor. The reason is a lot of those beggars are full-time beggars, and they are earning a lot of money by begging on the streets. I may have told the story once about when I was in China many, many years ago, and I was at a train station, and little boy comes up to me and he's saying about, "Oh, I'm so hungry. I haven't eaten today. I'm so hungry. Can you buy a map for me?" And I, became a little bit of a sucker, and I said, "Okay, yes, I'll buy." And I think I bought a couple maps from him. And then he said, "Oh, thank you so much. Now I can eat today." And then I saw him a little while later because I was waiting for my train and I was there for quite a while. And I finally said to him, "Hey, would you like something to eat? I have some food here." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh no, my father and I eat at the finest restaurants." And I remember I went and I got his father and I took the maps that the son had sold to me and I said, "Give me back my money right now." And I forced him to give me back my money. But the idea here was that, he was in a sense a professional beggar. He was not in poverty, nor was he living in poor. And that's why I say to a lot of people when they're traveling in a place like Asia, if you want to give money or help somebody, give money to an organization or a group where you know it's going to go for somebody in need. Do not just throw your money away on somebody on the street, because there's a couple things you're doing with that. Number one, you're teaching them that begging and lying and cheating and all these other things is a profitable way to make money. So in a sense, you're supporting this whole industry of the lying, cheating, and begging. And the other thing is that these people probably, most of them, do not need it. Yes, there's every once in a while where I might see somebody who's obviously in such pain, who really looks very sick, whose family maybe dragged them out in the street and put a bucket in front of them to beg for money. And sometimes I may give money in a case like that. But on the other hand, there's something really wrong with that too. The fact that the money has dragged someone who's on their deathbed out to the street to beg and to earn money. And generally, I would say there's probably a very good chance that money won't go to help that person you see on the street, but will go instead into the pocket of the people who put them there. So that's why it's also important, anyone who's going to travel in any of these countries, to understand what's the definitions between poverty and living poor. And it's not always exactly what we see or what we feel or what we think it is. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast, that it's made you think a little bit, because that's kind of what we like to do here, is talk about all things to do with living life as a global citizen. We believe that everyone can live life as a global citizen. Even if you're not able to travel or you can't travel now, you can still be interested in other parts of the world and what life is like on the other side of the globe. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to it. We'd love to have you be part of our community. And check out our blog, A Bus on a Dusty Road. Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate you, our listeners, for your time.